Hello, everyone. I am Juliana Fajargini. Thank you for being here today. I will be talking about adding support to a protocol in Surikata using my project with Outreachy as an example. I've been working in adding Postgresql protocol to Surikata. Bit about myself. I am a Brazilian currently living in Portugal. I have a degree in information systems and I have done lots of cool things in the IT field, but I've been away from that for a while. And that's why I sort of feel sometimes that I'm not really in my place. So I'm like a cat among the meerkats, but they're just getting better thanks to this great community and Outreachy. And what is Outreachy? This is an initiative to increase diversity in open source for underrepresented communities. They offer paid remote internships for people to work with open source projects. They run twice a year and they last for 3 months each. If you want to know more, you can check outreachy.org or their Twitter. There's a lot of information there. And there are 3 phases during applying for Outreachy. Tarushi will be sharing more of that later on, but I will just focus on a few topics regarding the second phase, which is the contribution phase. First, it's really important to think about your project choice. You can think in terms of affinity, what skills you have, or what are your learning goals. It's important to respect and follow community guidelines. This will change from project to project, but it's really important to respect that. It's in case of Surikata, you will have to read Surikata contribution guidelines before submitting some contribution. You will have to accept the contribution agreement, which is on their webpage. And regarding the tasks themselves, you do your best to understand things, pay attention to what's explained, to what the text that is available is about, but do not let yourself get stuck. Remember that you have the mentors in the community and they are there to help. When you have a contribution, you share that via pull request on GitHub. And if you have any feedback to incorporate, you will do that in a different branch. Those are a few details from the contribution guidelines, by the way. And whenever you can, help others because we are a community. And a bit about why did I choose OISF and Surikata. From the technical perspective, I had some background with C, and the first project I was working with was for converting protocol from C to Rust, so I thought that would be useful. But also, when I visited their page, OSF team had like 2 women, Kelly and Shivani, and I really felt like I would like to be there, so they had more women around. Okay, and what is my project right now? As I said, it's for adding protocol support for Postgresql. And in short, this means adding the basics. So being able to support and recognize a connection message with username and database. There are other parameters, but not for now, and supporting queries. And with this, it would be a step for allowing Surikata to support other SQL-like protocols like CockroachDB. And this is done in Rust because Surikata is trying to move towards Rust for it being a systems language which focuses on being memory safe without impacting performance. What that means is that it doesn't have a garbage collector, so you can you don't have to worry about performance. A bonus for that is that Rust also has the non-crate, which is a library that helps a lot with parsing. But if you are not familiar with Rust, you may get lots of compiler errors, which are your friends, really. And a disclaimer that I think is important is that adding protocol support to Surikata is not a small task and it's not a beginner task. So if this is your first contribution ever to the tool, it's better to take baby steps and start with something smaller first. And if you are not familiar with what a protocol is or what Surikata does exactly and what does it mean to add protocol support, there are a few key elements. First, if we think that Surikata is a tool for monitoring network traffic and detecting suspicious activities, this means that it has to be able to understand the network traffic it is monitoring. And this only happens if it is able to understand that protocol. And that's what we do when we implement such protocol in Surikata. There are a few key elements here. One is protocol itself. Those are specifications or guidelines that tell how things should work in a certain thing. So for instance, Postgresql is a protocol that will tell you how the communications between the server of this database and the client communicate, what the messages look like, what types of messages do you have. Then we also are talking about network traffic, as I said, and this is a communication and exchange of information. Network traffic has layers. So when you hear IP or TCP, UDP, and application layer protocols, which Postgresql is, those are layers of a network, as to say. And I've mentioned Postgresql is a database. And when we go to the messages itself, we are talking about parsing, which is analyzing and understanding. And regarding Surikata, we will be integrating whatever we parse into Surikata itself. So we will make sure that what we have implemented is connected to the core of Surikata and that API, so things can really and actually run. And this is a more visual example. Right now, if you download or clone Surikata from GitHub and try to analyze a Postgresql package file with it, it will not detect anything related to Postgresql because it doesn't understand this. It's like if you were hearing someone talking in a language you do not know, you wouldn't catch any information, at least not from the language, because you don't know that language. And only when you get, I don't know, classes or anything, then you get to understand that language and then you will pick a few words of that. Another way to see this is if you go to Surikata configuration file, which is Surikata YAML file. Right now, if you make a search, if you search for Postgresql keyword, you won't find anything related to that among their application layer protocols because it's not implemented yet. This feature doesn't exist. But once this project is merged to the main one, you will be able to find and enable Postgresql. Some useful resources in this task. First, there is the phase where you try to understand what's going on. So from a developer's perspective, you will have Surikata Redmine page, and you will have all the details for Surikata installation, then the developer's guide. Then from a user's perspective, you have the documentation for Surikata, only the docs, which is useful as well. And for the protocol, it's useful to check if there are any RFCs, which are definitions of protocols. Those are official and will have lots of details. Sometimes they don't have this, so Postgresql doesn't, but the official manuals will help you a lot. And for Surikata, GitHub is also an excellent source because you have Surikata Developer's Guide, and even previous commits and discussions will help you understand how can you approach things, what is it that you are trying to do and achieve. Quick look on a bit of the dev guide on GitHub. Here, for instance, if you go to extending the application layer, you will see a bit of how the parser works. What are the callbacks for the API? And an example of what it would look like in C or in Rust and the return types we will be working with when implementing a protocol in Surikata. There's more here, and I recommend you to check if you want to try this. And for the commits, here are two excerpts from a commit from my awesome mentor, Shivani, where she explains the DC RPC parser. And this is useful both if you want to understand this parser, but if you want to understand how parsers work, how can you describe things, what's going on, in which file you should put what. So there are lots of useful information there. Just a second. Sorry. I'll be right back. I heard someone calling me and I was trying to understand what is going on.
No worries, Juliana, take your time. I also can turn on your camera if you would like it, but
yes,
not
that's
at all
okay.
necessary. Okay.
Because I use gestures a lot and I'm just talking to myself right now. Okay, back to sharing. Is it on?
It is, it looks great.
Nice. So as I was saying, you find a lot of good information here, both in terms of how you could do things, but how you learn as well. Other useful resources, tools for generating packet files, which you will be using when you are trying to understand or implement a protocol. Wireshark is great for analyzing PCAPs, as we call those, and Wireshark Wiki will allow you to find lots of PCAPs for lots of protocols. If you have a setup that allows you to have the network traffic you are interested on at your local network or wherever, you can also use tcdump to sort of take a snapshot of network traffic, and then you can analyze with Wireshark. For implementing the protocol itself, sometimes if you get stuck and you don't know how to do something or how to approach, besides our great mentors, you can also check other implementations. So for instance, since Wireshark is also an open source, I've used it to approach a few of the challenges I've faced while implementing Postgresql. And something that was key to me in approaching this huge and challenging task of adding a new protocol to Surikata was discovering the setup applyer.py script, which is a great tool. I'll be talking more about it in a few minutes. So Wireshark, this is what it looks like. As I said, it's an open source tool, so you can go on and download, it's free. You open it, I think you can, I don't do it a lot, but I believe you can also do it live for network protocol traffic, but I usually go for PCAPs. This is a template PCAP that you can find in Surikata. And here we have a list of the packets that it has found on that file. Here are the details it has dissected in a human readable way, and here we have the raw data. If we select any of the packets and go follow TCP stream, this will allow me to see sort of the conversation that is going on. And here, for the template PCAP, as I mentioned, we have a message from the client in red and a message from the server in blue. And here we have hello world and bye, quite short. This is useful for you to understand what is the anatomy of your packets and your messages in a more tangible way, as to say. Sorry, and also when you are writing unit tests, this can be useful for you to get some real data. Okay, about a possible approach when you are solving most tasks in life, and this isn't different for protocols implementation. There are several possible approaches. Mine was somewhat like this. So it's really important to communicate. I've mentioned that I had a project that was for converting a protocol from C to Rust. And a few weeks after I started, when I submitted my first pull request, we found out that another group was also working on the same task, but because they hadn't claimed the task on Redmine, the dev core team of Surikata didn't know about that. So this duplicated effort went for a while until they found it out and decided that I should be moving to another project since the other team's progress was more advanced. So ask first, can I claim this, or would this be a good feature? So there are less unneeded effort, let's just say. And it's also good to share early, because if I had shared my pull request earlier, or the other team had, we would know what was going on. But besides of that, when we share early, we get feedback earlier, we know if we are heading in the right direction or not. It's useful, it's good, it's educational to understand Surikata's code base. You can find nice scripts, you understand how the folder structure goes, you understand where you could find useful information for how other people have implemented things, how could you write your unit tests, what the API looks like, callbacks, etc., etc. Then the protocol itself, you have to understand what are the characteristics, the behavior, if it runs over TCP or UDP, if it has both, but Surikata only is interested in one of those, for instance, what are your packets and messages anatomy like I've shared with you on Wireshark. Then understand your task itself. What is the minimum viable product that you have? Is it just a connection message and queries? Is it something smaller that allows you to understand how everything works, and then you can keep adding to that? Try to break it into smaller, more approachable tasks, because it's a big one and you have to have deliveries that give you a sense of progress. And from a more practical perspective, what are your building blocks? Because you will be parsing those. What are your message types? So it's important to understand this. So getting started somehow. If we try to, again, like I did for Postgresql, if we try to run Surikata over the template pcap that I showed you previously, it will not recognize anything right now because it does not understand the language, as to say, that is in that pcap. But coming back to that beautiful script that I've mentioned, if we run something like setup applyer.py and pass, in my case, the option for it to generate Rust code as well with new protocol, it will generate and patch all the needed infrastructure to have a running protocol. What does this mean is that it will patch the makefile, it will create the infrastructure in Rust, it will create the infrastructure in C, it will even create the logger necessary for you to have the loggers in Surikata, and that will be useful for when you want to have your Surikata verify tests as well. And if we do this and then build Surikata again, and we run over that same template pcap file, we will now see that Surikata does recognize the messages hello world and bye. And this is just by running the script. And this is great because this allows you to have something that works from the beginning, and you can just go and start adding and adjusting. So it will slowly change from this template mockup protocol to your protocol. There are lots of challenges in this, coping with large tasks, as I've mentioned, Then if you are new to Surikata, Rust, all of those can be quite steep learning curves. We have a nice depiction of what it looks like to try to learn Rust, for instance. Every and each new protocol will have their specificities that will make that, will account for a new learning curve as well. But if we manage to relax, and we have a community that is helpful in that way, because they are just really human people. Trust me, I've seen a few of them, or they are just meerkats, I don't know. Surf the waves and it gets better. A few useful steps that I've used. We get an overall understanding of the application layer protocol, looking at the documentation, finding the PCAPs, inspecting them, playing with Wireshark. We get familiar with Surikata code base a little. We can play with setup app layer script, as I did. Then we can generate a new protocol and add from there, as I said. How can we do this? What I did was to find a simple use case and find or generate PCAPs for that. Then we write parsers for this simpler use case. And then we must not forget to also write the unit tests for it. And we start to do small adjustments to make Surikata recognize our protocol messages that we just parsed instead of the template one. This, in order to achieve this, the Rust parser, which will be in your new protocol.rust file, is really useful because it sort of explains how do you go from having your parsers that you understand your message to making Surikata use those and make Surikata understand your message. For a while, to me, I couldn't really connect the dots, but when I saw this, things got much, much clearer. And I've mentioned that to find a simple case, to me, that was an Ssl handshake on Postgresql. This is represented by these parts here. In that, the client or the front end will send an SSL negotiation package to the server, and the server will accept, deny, or send an error message, and that's it. Looking on Wireshark for that, what we have is here, this first line here from the client is the SSL request, 8 bytes here. Then we have the response from the server. This is something else already. This is the startup message. But these two, I've started with these two because this would allow me to have, if I could have this part functioning from beginning to end, I would know how everything worked, but not everything, but I would have a sense of how to go from 0 to Surikata reading the message, and I would be able to keep adding messages and subprotocols to that. And here, Surikata parses the SSL request. We see here the message type is an SSL request, the dummy protocol versions that tells the server that this is a request, and here we get an answer, SSL accepted. And what now? What does one do? What I am doing? I'm really happy because I have a working minimum viable product. Since this is such an overwhelming task, for a while I wasn't sure I would even achieve this. I'm right now trying to parse the error messages that may also happen during the SSL handshake and in other moments. And I will just keep adding to the protocol more messages. So protocols try to handle TCP gaps and always testing and debugging. And the beautiful thing about contributing to an open source project is that even when the internship ends, I can keep doing it. I don't have to stop. And that's it. Thanks for listening. And if you have any questions, please, they are more than welcome. You're muted.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Juliana. That was wonderful. We do have some questions, but we're going to hold them to the end. Tharushi, I'm going to turn on your camera and you can start screen sharing. Rishi, why don't you get started and I will get your camera on for you.
So hello, welcome to today's webinar. Let me just get this. Okay. So hope you're all having a good time. I'm Tharushi and I'm an Outreachy intern working with OISF. So if I proceed to tell a little bit more about myself, I'm from Sri Lanka, a small island in South Asia. And I study computer science at University of Colombo, and I'm absolutely passionate about computer science, mainly data structures, algorithms, and also programming in Python. And ever since I started working at OISF, working on all of these amazing things about Surikata, I have a growing inspiration for information security as well. So now I will take you through my internship experience. Working with the Open Information Security Foundation through Outreachy, and so how you could also do the same. So the project I contributed to was improving Python tools for Surikata. So moving on, most of you might be having the question, what exactly is Surikata? So it's basically a free and open source network threat detection engine that is fast and robust. It's capable of many things, such as real-time intrusion detection, inline intrusion prevention, network security monitoring, and also offline PCAP processing. And you could find more details about Surikata on the official website, surikataids.org. And in Surikata, we have two mostly used and active Python tools. One is Surikata Update, which is used to update and manage rules for Surikata. So this one is mostly used by the users. And on the other hand, we have Surikata Verify, which is used to test many features of Surikata. So that is mostly used by developers. So during my internship period, the Python tool I worked on was Surikata Verify. So I think it's a lot more clear what exactly Surikata Verify is. To put it simply, it's a Python tool used for QA during development. And to test these features of Surikata, we have Surikata verification tests. So they're basically tests that run Surikata with a specific configuration or inputs and verify the outputs. So this is the Surikata Verify repository on GitHub. So here you could find the Surikata verification tests in this folder right here. And if we proceed to go into the tests folder, so here you see the tests one by one. And if you were contribute to Surikata Verify, you would be doing it here in this run.py Python script where all of the magic happens. And this script could also be used to run all of this script, all these tests. That is simply by going into the Surikata source directory, you have to type in the path to this run.py Python script. And you could see how each test is run one after the other. And you also get a message whether the test passed or failed. So moving on to how I contributed to Surikata Verify. So I worked on a couple of issues. Firstly, I implemented the parallel tests capability. And secondly, we validated the output using a Json schema. And thirdly, we added support for Symlinks for test directories. And fourthly, we converted some tests to Python. So moving on to the first issue of parallel tests capability. So earlier, these tests in Surikata were run in serial. That is one after the other. And if you could see right here, the total elapsed time is at 128. But now using multiprocessing, they run in parallel. So by default, it would be using the number of cores in your machine as the number of parallel jobs. For example, here you could see that the number of concurrent jobs being run is 4. And if we take a look at the elapsed time, so it has come down to just 45 seconds from 128. So you see what a great improvement it's made. But in the process of making it work, we also ran into several problems. For example, on machines that have too many cores, there were too many parallel tests, causing it to run out of memory. So as a solution, what we did was to limit the maximum number of parallel jobs to 8. And secondly, we came across some tests that were failing due to timing issues, which actually happens to be an inherent bug in Surikata. So I'm actually glad how this implementation helped us find such important things. So the second issue I worked on was to validate the output of these tests using a JSON schema. Basically, for those of you who don't know, a JSON schema is a specification to define the structure of your JSON data. For example, you could make sure the source IP is of type integer and so on. So using this schema that you see right here, we validated the eve.json output, which actually contains alerts, anomalies, metadata, file information, and protocol-specific records. So after each Surikata verification test is run, its output is validated with this schema. And if the output of the eve.json does not follow the rules of the schema, it fails with an invalid JSON schema error. Optionally, you could also run this on all of the tests by running the checkEve.python script that we've introduced, or even just a specific file or directory by giving it as a parameter. So another issue that I worked on was to support Symlink for test directories. Currently, Surikata Verify does not pick up on Symlinks. That is, if you had a folder that had a symlink to another test, that test would not be run because it's a symlink. So we added support for symlinks as well. Here comes the biggest question. How can you contribute to Surikata Verify, just like how I've done? So I think Juliana already mentioned how you could get started. So I will proceed to show you. So we start with getting yourself registered on Redmine, which is used to track the issues. And once you're registered, you could log in and we'll go to the issues page, which lists out all of the issues, which is right here. So next we'll filter for the tickets where the assignee is community ticket to get the tickets that are available and free. And once it's applied, you get a list of all the issues. So you could select one that you wish to work on. But first you have to make sure it's free and you could work on it. So you click on edit and ask if you could claim it. And once someone from OISF approves it, you could proceed to change the assignee to yourself and get started. So to summarize what I've just shown you, first register on Redmine, claim a ticket, that is to ask if it's available, and then assign it to yourself. And then I would recommend you to read the contributing guidelines for Surikata. And it's also important to sign the Open Information Security Foundation Contribution Agreement on the official Surikata website. So finally, you could clone the GitHub repository and get started. Finally, I'd like to add some tips and tricks for you to keep in mind. So one thing I highly recommend is starting with tasks that are labeled as beginner. So this is a ticket on Redmine that's labeled as beginner, as you could see here. So basically, this would help you to be familiar with the code base. And then you could gradually increase complexity of the tasks that you're working on as your confidence grows and you're able to tackle way more complicated things, which is actually what I did. And then when you're assigned an issue, you should definitely read the descriptions given on the issue again and again until it sort of starts to make more sense. And on these descriptions, we also have links to other similar issues and other resources that are very helpful. So be sure to check them out. And if nothing makes sense, what I would do is just do a keyword search so that you actually have a place to start looking. You should always ask questions and clear your doubts. You could ask task-specific questions on the Redmine ticket itself and other general questions on the Surikata forum that you see right here, where so many people have been asking their questions, because the entire team at OISF is so helpful and will give you some amazing tips. So another thing to be mindful about is how you structure your Git commit messages. Generally, you're advised to wrap the subject at line at 50 characters and also the commit body at 72 characters. And in open source, it's important that these conventions are followed because so many people will be contributing to the same project, and it's nice to have consistency. So now that you've done some work, you should always go ahead, submit a pull request and ask for feedback to make sure you've been doing the correct thing. So I hope all of you will have a good time contributing to Surikata. And I came to intern at OISF through Outreachy. And I think you already know what Outreachy is about. So if anyone's interested in applying, I'll mention how the application process works. So initially you have to fill out an initial application, which includes answers to 4 essay questions. You can find the questions on the website outreachy.org, along with instructions for each question. And once your initial application is approved, you have to start making contributions. So it works like this. You'll have access to a list of projects out of which you could pick about 1 or 2 that you like. And then you have to contact the project mentor who will give out instructions about where you could find the issues to work on, and then start contributing. But contrary to popular opinion, this was actually the only project I applied for during my application process. So I think it really depends on the amount of time you have at hand, because since I only had just one project to work on, I was able to give my 100% to it. And then next comes the final application. So it requires you to record at least 1 contribution, but the more you contribute with high quality code, more chances there are for you to get selected. So you could mention all of your contributions and fill out a final application, 1 per each project you're applying for. And finally, be passionate about what you do, because it's true when they say either do it with passion or just don't do it at all. Because when you love the work that you do, you are able to do so much better. And like Juliana mentioned, always help others. And it's important that you do not self-reject even before you apply. Just believe in yourself and be confident that you can do it. So I hope many of you here today will definitely consider applying next time. So thank you for being with me throughout. If you have any questions, you can also contact me through any of the social media channels or send me an email. And finally, I'd like to thank the amazing team at the Open Information Security Foundation for being so supportive and so helpful throughout my internship, and also to Outreachy for giving me this opportunity. Thanks.
Well done, Thirushi. Thank you so much. Thank you both, Juliana and Thirushi. I just want to say that as a member of the Open Information Security Foundation, we are just thrilled that you joined us as interns. Partnering with Outreachy has always been such a great experience for the project and the foundation. But you two have certainly taken it to a next level. So thank you so much for all your hard work and for sharing with us the work that you've been doing and sharing it with the community. We do have a few questions that I want to bring up to folks, and please, we still have a bit more time. So if you have more questions, feel free to put them in the chat window or put them in the Q&A. The first one, though, I'm going to put to Juliana. from Anna. She said, thank you for your presentation. I think I've seen you mention on Twitter that it was your first time working with Rust. Is that correct? Did you know how to code in Rust before Outreachy, or did you learn it as a project progressed? And do you have any advice for anyone interested in learning Rust? So I'll hand that to Juliana.
So it was indeed my first experience with Rust. And I had to learn on the go. At first, I tried to do as I have done with other languages before, which is to check the code base and try to make sense of it. But this isn't really good for Rust. So what I would recommend is that if you check the Rust book, it is really great. At one point I said, okay, if I keep doing this, I will just be smashing my head on the wall, and this is not productive. So I stopped and I took a step back, and I took sort of a week to go and just study Rust. This is a bit scary when you only have 3 months for an internship, but I kept telling myself that we are here to learn. And so I accepted the fact that I had to do that, and it would be way more productive. So I read the first 3 or 4 chapters of Rust book, and I also checked a wonderful, gentle introduction to Rust. I can share the links so they can be on the YouTube video as well, and those helped me a lot. And I feel way more confident with Rust, even though it's Rust.
You did a great job, and honestly, I think it's really helpful for folks to understand sort of how you go from not knowing it at all and kind of moving through it while you're doing the project. So really, hats off to you for bringing up your skill level. So Juliana, there's another question to you in the Q&A from Raymond Hansen. I'm happy to read it out loud, or you can read it out loud, whichever you prefer.
Yes, I can. It's how effective do you think that your Postgres protocol parser is at the end of this project? And do you think that it is complete, or are there parts of the protocol that are not yet parsed? There is a lot to be done still. As I said, it's good that this is an open source project, so I can keep contributing even once the internship is over, because there are lots of messages, there are sub-protocols. And when I realized how complex the whole thing would be, because this is my first time trying to parse a protocol as well, what I did, as I said, was to think of the smallest part possible that would allow me to get an overall idea of how does Surikata parse something, how does a parser work on Surikata. So I've just really did a small part that allowed me to understand the whole process and the whole picture, so I would be able to keep adding to that. I've mentioned this a few times on the presentation, and that's true. There's a lot of work to do still, but I think that the approach that helps in this case is to understand what it should be done with a small part, and then you improve from there.
Fantastic. Another question just came up. Did you contribute to OISF before Outreachy? I think I'm going to put this both to Ruchi and Juliana. And what was your past experience with the open source before Outreachy?
Yeah, so I haven't really contributed to Surikata before, but I have worked with open source software where I was an intern before at a company that where the projects were open source. But this was actually the first time reading the Surikata code base and then all of the tasks. But you know, the mentors were really helpful to understand the code base. So it was actually my first time, but I didn't feel like there was a very steep learning curve in that aspect. So Juliana?
So this was my first time contributing to OISF, at least before the contribution phase. I had never contributed to it before. And I haven't really done any open source contribution in the sense of code-like contributions. During Outreachy contribution phase, I did try to contribute to Mozilla as well, but I didn't have a lot of time. Back then I was working full-time, so I decided to keep focused on interacting and getting to be with OISF community. In the end, I just applied for Surikata. So yes, I didn't have a lot of previous experience with open source from a contribution perspective, and none with OISF.
And now you're part of the family. So once you're in, you're in. It's a wonderful job. A couple more questions. So a question came up about whether or not slides would be provided to all attendees. We will send you the slide deck, the wonderful slides made by our presenters. We will also, of course, have this recording available on our YouTube channel. Another question that came up from Kriti, apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name. I've been looking at the keywords of beginner issues, and it's hard to make sense of them looking at such a large code base and not knowing where to begin. Could you please advise how to overcome that? And Tharushi and Juliana, I'll put that to you. And we have other members of the OISF team as panelists, Victor Julian, who is Surikata's founder and our lead developer, and Shivani, who is one of the other amazing developers on our team, who has been leading the Outreach intern project here at OISF. I will open that up to all four of you if you have something you'd like to share. Juliana and Tharushi, why don't you start if you have suggestions?
Yeah, so like I said, I think if you would try to do a keyword search, that was one. And then sort of like go through the code base one line at a time, maybe, you know, trying to make sense of it, and then ask any questions. I mean, we had, I think it was Jason, he was like so descriptive when I asked a question. So, you know, it always helped to understand something. So not knowing where to begin. Well, what I would suggest basically is a keyword search, and then to try to, you know, make sense of it one line by line. And then, or you could also like check out the issues that other people have worked on, and then check how they have, like, you know, coded and how they have solved it, so that, you know, you will get an idea where to look, what to do, what is this expecting. So sometimes most of these beginner issues were just had one line of code to solve it. So, you know, just figure out where that one line of code would fit, and, you know, you can just do great things with just one line of code.
Great advice. Juliana, do you have something to add?
Yes, sometimes the tasks on Redmine will not have a detailed explanation, but if we reach out to the community and the mentors, they will tell us, you can find more information here. So for instance, I was working with, during the contribution phase, converting the unit tests to use the API, fail-pass API, the macros. And I recall that when I saw that, I didn't really know what to do with it. But Shivani then shared an explanation on the mailing list. And I read that and it made a bit more sense. And then I thought, okay, I think I know what's going on here. And they pointed out to a commit with a code that had been submitted by one of them. And when I read that, I said, okay, now I think I get to understand what's going on. But if you need more help, you can always reach out to the community and tell them where you are. Don't be afraid to say, I've reached this point. I don't know where to go next. And if not the community, sometimes we prefer friends. I've done that with friends as well. I've made friends read my test and say, all right, I think I should be doing this here. Is this correct? Does this make sense to you? Everything goes, as long as I really like the fact that this is an open source project, so you do not have to be afraid of sharing your code to make it make sense. That's good. You can jump on a call with a friend and say, all right, I'm doing this. Does this make sense to you? Is this correct? Am I crazy? You are not crazy.
Great suggestions. Thank you both. And Shivani, would love to have you sort of weigh in on this. And it's a perfect segue into another question that came in through the Q&A, which is, what are the skills that are needed for this project? So if you could give a little bit from your perspective on how beginners can start, as well as what skills are needed for the project, would be wonderful.
Yeah, can you hear me? I didn't do a mic test. Okay, so I think if you have a bit of C and basic experience won't be the right word, but if you know basics of Rust and you know basics of C, you would be good for most of the project. Yeah, you won't be able to do quite big tasks like the one Juliana has undertaken. Like that is too big of a task, so it won't be possible to jump into that right away. But I think if you start small, like Taroshi mentioned, look for beginner level tickets and then move on to slightly higher ones. You can always ask on the ticket whether the ticket is something that you would be able to do or not. You can also define your skill set, because sometimes it's difficult to just look at a ticket and see the explanation and description there and figure out whether it is something that you can do even with the skill set that you have, because we understand the project is huge. So yeah, I think the first step from your side can just be coming and asking. And if you know basics of C and you know basics of Rust, you are very good to ask. And I think the other projects are in Python. So if you know Python, then I don't think you need to know advanced level Python. Maybe beginner to intermediate would work out just fine for our Python projects. There are, of course, some parts that might be a little tricky, but again, we can work them out. So yeah, that's about it. And yes, if you have experience in network security, you know, a lot of you know, tooling and you know, very you know, things like you're pretty good with things like Wireshark and TCP dump, and you deal with lots of traffic every day. You don't necessarily have to contribute to code. Then you can also contribute to finding out what's wrong with code if there is anything. You can be a researcher. So there are many other ways of contribution. So coding is not just one way. I saw somebody's question about contributing to documentation as well. And I think the answer to that is a big yes. We need somebody to come and document for us. So if you think you can contribute in that way, it would be really nice. I think for that, the skill set you need is be able to read C and Rust code and be able to make sense out of things. All of it, yeah, probably would not make sense. So you can always ask, but documentation is a very good place to start and learn more about things.
Absolutely. Yes. I would echo that, Shivani, that documentation support is certainly always and forever needed. So if you're interested, please feel free to email us at info@oisf.net. Feel free to reach us on the community forum. I'm going to quickly share my screen so you all have that information right there. I'm not even going to put in present mode because we are already over time. And then I just wanted to say one more thank you to Juliana and Taroshi, and of course Shivani for leading our Outreachy intern project here at OISF. Such a wonderful opportunity and such a great experience for all of us. Thank you everyone for joining us. Our next webinar, don't miss it. Our next webinar is March 18th. Threat Hunting with Surikata with our one and only Peter Menev. You don't want to miss it. And if you have any questions, please reach out to us at info@oisf.net, at Surikata, on our Twitter, and of course in our community forum. And with that, I will say thank you to everyone. I'm going to try and stop sharing. And we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Thanks, everybody.